Hello, everybody. Happy LGBT History Month and the warmest of welcome to you all for today's especially inclusive and inspiring online learning. So my name is Kirsten. I'm Membership Officer for CILIP Scotland, and we're also joined today by my colleagues Sean and Leah. So if you need anything throughout, please don't hesitate to send us a message in the chat and we'll be happy to help. To complete the technical side of things quickly and get on to the good stuff, I'll simply point out that as you're aware, we are recording today, but only in speaker mode, so you won't be very visible either way. It's therefore entirely your choice whether you keep cameras on or off. Always lovely to see everyone's faces, but if you start struggling with bandwidth at all, we might suggest popping the camera off. If you could please keep your mics muted for now, we'd appreciate that, just so that we can hear a fantastic presentation, although there will be an opportunity for questions later on, because of course it wouldn't be a session with diversity at its heart if we didn't bring everyone's voices together. And last but not least, captions are enabled, which you can toggle on or off depending on your preference by using the toolbar that should be appearing at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, it is a real pleasure to welcome Sally Bell of the SCURL EDI Network and the University of Glasgow to help us discover how we can make the most of SCURL's dynamic new equity, diversity and inclusion toolkit. From our very first glimpse, it was clear to the whole CILIPS team that this new toolkit is filled with tangible, applicable inspiration for both HE libraries and those of other sectors, passionate as our profession is about expanding equality of opportunity and championing social justice. From collections and discovery to demographics, recruitment, and so much more, this toolkit really synthesizes and streamlines EDI learning that is key to all our operations. And we're so thrilled to have Sally here with us today to share some top tips on how best to navigate the range of resources that it brings together to benefit library staff and patrons alike. Sally, thank you so very much for joining us today. Whenever you're ready, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. So, as that wonderful introduction said, I am Sally Bell. I work at the University of Glasgow and I am on the SCURL EDI Network and formerly was the chair. So if there's anybody on the call today who has their camera not watching, perhaps just listening, or if anyone with visual impairments, I will describe myself very briefly. I am a white woman, creeping towards middle age, long hair and a pleat down one side, big glasses and a turquoise jumper. I also have with me a very orange cup of tea, which contrasts beautifully with my jumper. And I would encourage everybody else to have a nice warm drink on what is a slightly bleak day where we are. I know some of you in the chat have got sunshine. It's very nice for you. We don't have that here. So, what I am going to cover today is a little bit of an introduction to SCURL, the EDI network and decolonisation, just to set a bit of the scene. I'll talk a bit about the toolkit development and then I'll give you an overview to a couple of different sections within the toolkit and also talk through a little bit of a case study from my own work, how I've made use of a section of the toolkit, how that's influenced my practice. A little bit on the next steps and feedback, and then, as Kirsten said, there's plenty of time for Q&A, so don't be shy, please don't be shy when we get to that point. So a little bit of background on SCURL for those of you who are unfamiliar. It stands for the Scottish Confederation of University and Research Libraries, which is a little bit more of a mouthful than just saying SCURL. It was established over 30 years ago to support collaboration across the academic libraries within Scotland. So there are 26 member libraries, which includes all the higher education libraries, National Library of Scotland, the OU Library and the two largest public library services, plus a whole host of other specialist research libraries. So it's a really lovely community representing that kind of research reference library element and the public libraries as well. So the main focus of SCURL is coordination, collaboration and advocacy, themes which are quite familiar to people who are CILIPS members because we kind of all strive for that in the sector. And we aim to fulfil aims of improving services and maximising resources, collaborating on cooperative library infrastructures, advocating for the benefit of library services and providing mutual support, which is a really key element of the EDI network. So these kind of aims are fulfilled through the facilitation of networks and groups. Those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with SCURL itself may be familiar with SCHEDL, the Scottish Higher Education Digital Library, which is a SCURL initiative kind of focused around that maximisation of resources and collaboration on the infrastructures and the purchasing of collections and things. So the EDI network is the newest of the SCURL networks, and it was established in November 2021 with the overall goal to facilitate consistent approaches to principles of EDI across member libraries. Sorry, I should possibly have said earlier on, it was on my title slide, but EDI in this context refers to equality, diversity and inclusion. So with that in the group, we use our knowledge and learning and collaboration to also inform the strategic direction of the SCURL Business Committee on the EDI matters. So from the outset of the EDI network in November 2021, there was really keen interest from across the SCURL community, and we have representation on the group from all the Scottish members, which includes the Open University Library. So it's really, really lovely, a wonderful, engaged group, a lot of passion in the room whenever we meet. So we do meet quarterly, and we also have an events programme, and as we're here to talk about today, the toolkit. So just before I come on to the toolkit, I'm going to give a little introduction to decolonisation, which is often talked to in parallel, sort of with EDI work. Just don't like to make the assumption that everybody has the same levels of knowledge. So if this is repetition for you, I'm sorry. If it's new, hopefully it helps shed a little bit of light on things. So the notion of decolonisation has been around for quite a while, but it really came into wider focus in 2020, the aftermath of George Floyd killing and the Black Lives Matters kind of resurgent. So from that point on, there's been a little bit more interest, and there's a lot of different definitions of decolonisation used. So if we take it right back to basics, decolonisation is carrying out work to undo colonialism. So obviously a lovely small aim there, totally tangible for everybody on a day-to-day basis. So I find it's easier to start breaking that down to different levels. So when you get to the individual and the library level, it's about acknowledging the ongoing impact of colonial activities on our lives and work. It's about taking action to change perspectives of people, organisations and institutions, and importantly, society, to shift that status quo. Now, that is also not a particularly easy goal on a day-to-day basis. However, it's very important. Really what decolonisation and EDI work, as I'll come on to, is about is focusing on a culture shift, and you're thinking more widely about why common knowledge is what it is, and you're working towards a paradigm shift from a culture of exclusion and denial to the making of space for other political philosophies and knowledge systems. Now, that also sounds quite big, but actually, if you're thinking about shifting common knowledge, it's about analysis, it's about questioning, it's about wanting to know why things are the way they are, and if they should be the way they are. And that is a much easier thing to apply to your day-to-day life, both at work and, in the broader sense. Now, quite a lot of the time when people are talking about decolonisation, it's about the lack of visibility of voices from the global majority. And this is really, really well acknowledged. But I think it's important to note that it goes broader, and there are other aspects that we perhaps don't consider quite so so readily. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the moment is a form of colonization. So any opposition to that movement is decolonization. There's similar colonial and decolonial elements about Israel-Palestine conflict. Going further back in history, the Japanese Empire used to colonize quite a large swathe of Oceania. So while from our perspective, and most commonly, people talk about decolonization in relation to kind of Western European colonial aspects, it does go much broader than that. So that's why thinking about this culture shift, about common knowledge and actions and perceptions is really, really important. And really what that boils down to is making diverse voices heard and uncovering hidden histories. And that last part's really important for LGBTQIA+ month. It is really about equality, diversity and inclusion work. And while there is a certain focus, especially I think in libraries and in the UK, around the sort of racial element, it goes a lot deeper and a lot broader than that. And we recognise that within the EDI network. When we first met and we started discussing where we wanted the network to go, what we wanted to really achieve, we had quite a large conversation about whether our focus was decolonisation or whether it went broader than that. And based on what I've just been saying about the sort of decolonial aspects, we decided that that EDI work was decolonisation work, and we needed to take in that full range, which you will see when you're sort of looking through different areas of the toolkit. We also kind of decided or realised, where the sort of support element comes into the SCURL networks, that there was a lot of uncertainty in the sector around EDI work. We all felt like everybody else was doing more than we were, but we weren't really entirely sure a lot of the time what that was. It was almost a kind of EDI FOMO. We felt like everybody else had something really fancy going on and we didn't. And I say we because I felt like that about other institutions, and I was like, oh, they must be doing so much more than us. But then other people felt like Glasgow were doing more than them. So we realised that actually gathering the case studies and creating a knowledge base would be a really valuable thing, so that we could highlight the activity within the sector and almost demystify a bit of what was going on. That spidered a little bit from the original goal. Anyone who's worked with me on anything at any point in time will not be shocked that it spiraled a little bit out of control and we had to rein it back in a bit. I do have a tendency to just run with things. Not always a bad thing, sometimes a little bit overambitious. But in this case, we had large, wide-ranging conversations, and we ended up with 6 subgroups of the EDI network, and each subgroup created a section of the toolkit, and there are those 6 sections available. So we have collections and discovery, which is broadly what you have and how people find it. We have a section on demographics. That's come through in the various different workforce studies over the years, that a lot of the time demographics of library staffing bodies don't necessarily represent the communities which they are serving. So we had a wee look at that. There's a glossary, which is the first section that we got launched, and it really underpinned all the rest of the work, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. There's a section on recruitment. So how can we recruit more equitably, and how can we possibly redress some of those issues of representation through the demographics? And we have resource lists, which is reading lists. So how we can engage with the academics and really promote the material that we've got, how we can diversify the content in those reading lists. And then we have the largest section, which is around student experience. So how do we engage we said students here, but it's really just users for those services that don't have an academic cohort. How do we engage the users? How do we make them feel represented in both the collections and the environment and the events that happen within the different libraries that we all work in? So have a wee go on my tea just now, take a little breather. What I'm going to do now is just show you some of these sections from within the toolkit. This is the main page. It's on the SCURL website. It's publicly available to everybody. It's just out there for the world. I think the link should be in the chat if you want to go and have a peek yourself if you haven't seen it already. So as I said, we've got the 6 different sections, and I'm going to start off with the glossary here. So we recognised within the network that if we were going to be doing this work, a very helpful thing for us to do would be to have a shared vocabulary. We wanted to embed the principles of inclusive language in what we were doing. You'll see when you're having a look at this page that we do reference other places that we have taken inspiration from, glossaries that we have kind of collated and processed and synthesized and used to create our own glossary. So it's an original piece of work, but it's taken a lot of inspiration from other places. It is also, you will note, not comprehensive. What we have done here is highlighted a selection of terms that we think are really core within the work that we were doing in the EDI network and for the sector as a whole. The links to the other places that we have taken inspiration, the larger pieces of work, those can help if you're needing to find the correct way to reference something which isn't part of our glossary. So saying that, it's not short, you know, it is covering a lot of the things that we will be talking about in our work. We do also highlight where there will be local practice. So what we've got here is a recommendation, it's advice, it's best practice. As you'll see here, we've linked out to these other glossaries where it's relevant to the sources. It's a really, really good starting point. A lot of the time in these sorts of conversations, I find people are very worried to say something in case they cause offence. You don't want to use the wrong term, you don't want to put it in the wrong context, you don't want to rock a boat. What we're hoping with the glossary is that that can give you a little bit of the language that you may need to tackle some difficult conversations, update policy and practice documents, and just inform yourself, build that confidence in yourself. EDI work always rocks boats, but knowing that you are using the correct terminology can really, really help when you want to break into some of the more difficult conversations. So, glossary was the first section of the toolkit we launched, and as I said, I think it's probably the most important. It forms that backbone to other work we do. As I mentioned, the student experience section is largest. And what you'll find here is that we have it sorted by various themes. So what that can help you do is find some case studies and some advice for a particular element of work that you might be carrying out. So when we're looking at feedback and suggestions, it's looking at ways that you might want to gather that, how you could collect your feedback, and how that might relate to different users that you have. Library environment is one section which I think is really valuable, and often kind of thought of a bit later down the line when you're talking about EDI work in libraries, but inclusive study spaces, the physical environment, the decor, a lot of that can sometimes have a very colonial aspect to it. I mean, I certainly know a lot of the older public libraries across Scotland, they have that very, and this is where presenting on Zoom is quite hard for me because I speak quite physically a lot of the time, where I'm kind of making my body into a sort of boxy shape, but they have like a really strong, solid sort of Victorian building vibe about them. And that's something that I've grown up with and I feel quite comfortable with, but actually that can be a very oppressive space for some people. And it is overall quite a colonial space because the money for a lot of these buildings has a questionable heritage. So this section in student experience has some lovely examples of how various libraries have built in inclusive study spaces, relaxation spaces. The University of Warwick have a sensory room, thinking about people who have sensory sensitivities. It's about lighting and decor and furnishing. And I think having these all in one place can give you a really nice perspective on your physical library space and, you know, ideas for what you might want to bring in there. So yes, as I've said, student experience brings in a whole host of things, and it is a very, very, very large section. You'll also find when you're looking through student experience, and indeed some other elements of the toolkit, there is a bit of overlap. You know, student experience and reading lists have quite a big bit of overlap, but actually they also have a big overlap on your collections, and the glossary is really valuable. And the student experience is impacted by your recruitment. This is another section of the toolkit, which has a slightly different slant. It's very almost behind the scenes operational because it is about us as a profession. It's about how we show ourselves, market ourselves when we are recruiting, and the conversations that we have internally around recruitment. So this is a section of the toolkit I want to focus on for a little case study about how the toolkit has influenced my own practice within the libraries. So what I did when I was looking at recruitment section was I started to think about how this could be applied for me when I am looking to advertise posts. And these two pieces of guidance on the recruitment section really helped me. They are about inclusive recruitment. So thinking about that whole process of how we inclusively bring people through into the profession. So I had a good read through the CIPD guidelines and the section from Diverse Educators. And I started to collate some thoughts and recommendations, the common themes that were coming through, to consider how I can adopt those. But I realised that there was a whole lot more going on the recruitment section of the toolkit. There's this little piece here about starting conversations with senior managers about diversity in recruitment. Actually, what I realised there was that I'm the manager. I need to have this conversation with myself about recruitment. And added to the two previous links, these three here were exceptionally helpful. And there's a lot of things that I've realised that we already do quite well. But I did also realise that there were common themes coming through in these recommendations that I could consider. So the main things that I highlighted from this section is that you need to structure your job descriptions very clearly, have as few criteria as possible, and consider removing desirable criteria, because actually, if the criteria is important to the job, it's not desirable. You need people to have that skill or experience. also have to make sure that you're expressing those skills and experience in terms of behaviours rather than competencies. So it's not that you are a charismatic person, it's that you are skilled at working with various stakeholders. And, you know, it takes a little bit of analysis to really consider what that language is and how that works, as it does for the next section, which is bias language. And I think certainly I was aware for job descriptions from my perspective that we weren't using stereotyped language, but I was also quite unaware about gendered wording, considering which words are masculine or feminine and how that feeds through in the job description as a whole. And also all these different guides said that you really need to be clear about your benefits, flexible working, and the organisational values, so people can really know upfront how equitably, you know, the terms and conditions of the job are. So I took these summary of recommendations and I looked at a job description from a post that we recently advertised to consider, you know, how good a job had we done? How well had we recruited, you know, inclusively? And some of this is managed kind of centrally through HR at Glasgow, so we don't have that much control. And the structure of the job description is the main one on that front. So obviously our job description structures and the adverts that get sent out are managed by human resources to set procedures and policies. So we do have a very clear structure in the job description. That is bang on and A-OK. We have a section about the purpose, which gives you a little summary of the job. We have a section of the responsibilities, so you can see what you'll be expected to do day in, day out. Then we have a section on knowledge, skills and experiences. And finally, the section on the terms and conditions. So I felt quite good about that. I was like, right, from the bat, we're ticking these boxes. But really, these are the basics. That's the kind of really at the very bottom of the pile. These are the things that you have to do. I started thinking about the other things that we could have changed. Having as few criteria as possible and removing the desirable criteria. We did an exceptionally poor job in this section. We had 24 listed criteria and 7 of those were desirables. Now, if I think of that from an applicant's perspective, that's 24 different requests that you are being expected to evidence your knowledge, skills and experience in. That is hugely daunting. Now, it was quite a senior post that we were advertising. It was a specific ask. However, some of the desirable criteria could have been essential, and some of them really just shouldn't have been there. So we had the desirable criteria of involvement in the delivery of inclusion and equality activities and programmes. That is a desirable criteria, but actually we mention working with EDI programmes in another part of the job description. So that's a bit of duplication, and really being aware of that duplication is something that can help to really, you know, manage that criteria. That made me aware of the duplication over knowledge, skills and experience. And actually, some of the essential criteria that we had were kind of just asking for the same thing in a different way, which, again, thinking from the perspective of an applicant, that almost feels like some sort of trap. Like, if you have demonstrated practical knowledge of library and heritage collection management, are you not then using the same evidence to show evidence of relevant practical experience of the professional processing of library manuscript or archival collections? When you start thinking of it from that term, there's definitely some things we could have done a lot better with the criteria. Then I started to think about, you know, the expression of those terms in behaviours rather than competencies. And we're quite good with that. We have a competency-based recruitment process. So actually, when I analysed that bit of language, we were not asking for personal attributes. We were asking for knowledge, skills, and experience that people already have. It isn't about who you are, it's about what you can do. But thinking about the language, the bias language section was really fascinating for me. Upon reading this whole job description, my thought was, oh, it's quite a masculine job description, because we were asking for analysis and we're asking for, you know, things around technicalities and systems. But I used an internet tool called Gender Decoder to run the text of the job description through, and it tells you the masculine coded words and the feminine coded words in the advert. And actually, the whole job description was fairly balanced. We had a total of 9 masculine terms, some of them repeated, and 11 feminine terms, also some of them repeated. So subconsciously, perhaps a complete fluke, we had done a reasonable job on that. But honestly, using that gender decoder tool is really fascinating. And I think is something that will just inform perhaps like my own document creation in future, not even just job descriptions, but just kind of being aware of where my natural communication kind of lies. And finally, the bit that we were considering, or I was considering, was the benefits, flexible working, and the organisational values. So again, some of this is kind of mandated by the university. We have corporate messages around EDI, the Athena Swan Awards for representation of gender equality in STEM. We have information on pensions, benefits. We have fixed pay scales, so we're not asking people to negotiate a salary. However, when I'd been reading the guidance on the inclusive recruitment, there's different opinions on the efficacy of EDI statements. Now, Glasgow does include an EDI statement in the terms and conditions to kind of show the atmosphere within the university. But the points that were raised around that is that the efficacy of the statement is only as strong as the number of groups that it will include, or rather not discriminate against. So you'll see in our statement, our university statement, it covers applications are particularly welcome from across our communities, and in particular from people of the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community, and other protected characteristics who are underrepresented within the university. And it goes on to give a link to the equality and diversity pages on the website. Now, this EDI statement makes it very clear that we are welcoming to applicants from the global majority. However, other protected characteristics is exceptionally vague. And saying you're underrepresented within the university, to an extent, you have to be in the university to know who's underrepresented. So that statement in itself could do with a bit of work. And it's something that we will try and take back and discuss with the Equality and Diversity Unit. But the other thing that I noticed that we did with this job description, and we are considering kind of rolling out across our job descriptions, is that we included an EDI element in the main responsibilities. So we have our main responsibility of the role to be actively engaged with the university and information services initiatives to promote equality, diversity and inclusion within the university's community. Work constructively with library collections colleagues to develop inclusive, critical and reflective professional practice. Now, having that in the main responsibilities kind of links back to what I was saying about that knowledge, skills and experience, and do we need to replicate in there information that's in the main responsibilities? It's just things for us to reflect on, but we do feel that putting it up front in those main responsibilities makes it really clear that there is that expectation that colleagues will be challenged to work inclusively where possible. So, last thing I thought to do with a job description is check it on the glossary. You've written this lovely document, you've done all of your analysis, You've made sure that you've got your balanced gender terms, you're asking for the right things, you've reduced your criteria. That's all a waste of time if we're using really inappropriate terminology. So the glossary is there for a little last pass. And that really is a little case study from my own practice as to how I can apply the information that has been collected in the toolkit. As I said, it's such a rich resource. That's just one example. Please do rummage around, explore it. And if you do find it helpful, or even if you think it could be improved, some changes, please tell us. Initial feedback that we've had from the sector has been really positive, but the EDI network as a whole is really, really keen to get some case studies from users of the toolkit so we can assess the ongoing value and impact. If you use it, please tell us. Tell us how you've used it. Tell us the benefit. Give us an idea if you have other information that you think is really valuable that we could include. Do not be shy. Any feedback is good feedback. We will be reviewing the content on an annual basis. So it's not rolling updates. That's far too labour intensive for a group of volunteers, even a very engaged, positive and wonderful group of volunteers. So what we'll be doing is we'll be gathering that feedback, and then in the summer each year we will review the feedback that we've had and we will decide what changes and updates that we need to make, especially in relation to the glossary, because terminology does change and evolve all the time. More generally, the EDI network as a whole, we are moving into the new phase now that the toolkit is live and launched. Our subgroups are disbanded and we're all back in one big happy family. We are working on more events. We're hoping to share more, bring the community in. We've gone away, we've done our little bit of work in the background, we've shared that with you all, and now we're going to focus on that events phase. And we are also putting together a reading group. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can get in touch with the network through the SCURL website. And when that is ready to go, we will include as many people as are interested. So that's me. I think 40 minutes of me talking at you is probably quite enough. And I'm very happy to open up to a Q&A session if anybody has any questions.
Wow, well, firstly, Sally, thank you so much. That was, I can scarcely think of another piece of work that is so comprehensive and yet approachable, or actually accessible is the word. I think you're really, the whole network, you're walking the walk with this. And I think the fact that you've taken us through a worked out example of how this has shaped and influenced and improved your own work, it really, what comes through for me is that kind of cultural transformation that really is at the heart of EDI and the central role that libraries can play. So thank you so very much. And yeah, we're sharing the links in the chat. So please don't be shy, everybody. You heard us. We want to hear from you. And please do keep posting questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. And just while people are typing, actually, Sally, I might, you'll see in the chat that Samantha had raised a really interesting point about the glossary and about terminology and how place can interact, especially through the example of show people versus show men and how that can resonate differently in north and south of the border. I wonder how that sense of place has come into play when we're looking at the glossary.
So obviously we have a Scottish perspective because we are SCURL, but we looked as broadly as we could in the creation of the glossary. We looked at glossaries from other regions. Primarily, there wasn't really a full Scottish collected glossary of this type. So I think we really were looking intentionally to broaden it beyond the Scottish perspective, because the whole point of EDI and decolonisation work is to broaden your perspectives. I think the point made here around show people and show men, the fact that that's a term used in Scotland, this is exactly the sort of feedback that we're really interested to get. The other problem that we have, I think, a lot of the lived experience that can inform this sort of practice is not something that we have a huge representation of in the EDI network, because it isn't hugely represented in the profession in Scotland. So getting feedback from people of this type is really, really helpful for us.
Amazing. And yeah, thank you, Samantha, for sharing it. It's so valuable, and we really admire actually that approach that SCURL are taking with this as well, to bring in as many voices as possible and to keep something like the glossary in particular so evolving. And thank you, everybody. I can see a number of questions coming in. So Helen's also saying thanks so much for the presentation, and again, the case study was particularly helpful. We're wondering how you're cascading the good practice within the organisation, either the library or the university as a whole. I love that question, Helen, because it feels kind of professional registration. You know, you've got your organisational context and you've got the wider sector context. But yeah, Sally, maybe you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, so we have an internal EDI group. We call it the Inclusive Community Network, because one of Glasgow University's core values is to create an inclusive community. So we take pieces of work like this to our Inclusive Community Network to share the practice within the different teams within the library. I certainly feed a lot of this information to the more senior managers. I'm aware that we have that responsibility to report up. You know, people only have so much time to do their own learning, and it's good to share. But we also have, within the wider university, there is an EDI community of practice. So we have a sort of peer support sharing of information. And we also have an equality diversity unit within human resources. So we've got lots of points of contact where we can share and feedback information. So when I mentioned about the information coming up around the diversity statements and job descriptions being useful or not, that's definitely something that I can feed back to HR as, you know, the statement is good, but it could be better.
Amazing. Thank you, Sally. And also building in that welcoming feedback, that is so important in all arms of the organisation as well. We've also got a question from Tony, who also thanks you for just such a wonderfully clear breakdown. I think this relates to the previous one, especially looking at the collections and discovery subgroup. So Tony's written that from within a university library, obviously a large amount of collections are informed by course reading lists, largely set by academics. How has your experience been, or what is your knowledge of using the toolkit in conjunction with academics in terms of improving collections?
So I'm not an academic liaison librarian. So I have not used the toolkit with academics. However, the resource list section has been built off the back of a lot of excellent work done at Glasgow School of Art and the Royal Conservatoire with academics. So that section of the toolkit is quite practice informed. And one element of it that I find really fascinating and really helpful is that they have approached creating that section of the toolkit in a sort of, why should I do this? And because the experience of having engaged with academics through quite concentrated pieces of work is there, they have included information where they're answering questions that you're likely to get asked as you go through that work. So academic staff might ask, why should I do this? Or they might say, oh, but in my subject area, this isn't relevant. So there's information there of how these different institutions have actually tackled those almost frequently asked questions that come up when you do start working with the academics. So I don't have personal experience of using the toolkit with academics, but I do know that that section was built from a lot of very good academic engagement and experience from some of the network members. So hopefully that helps.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That sounds really helpful to me. And Jennifer also echoing in the chat the importance of resource list, of reading lists, and that they'd actually been asked that recently by a visitor to their museum library. Did they have specific museum decolonisation resource lists? So that's so valuable to have this brought together in such a clear and accessible overview, as Jennifer says. I actually wonder if I could ask a question myself, because I'm so impressed by the decision-making process that has gone into the toolkit, that I can well imagine. I love that comment that you made earlier about just accepting and embracing that EDI will rock the boat. And I think that informs a lot of our work here at CILIPS as well. I'm wondering what the process of decision-making was like, because it feels as if once you pull some of these threads, you know, whether it's the glossary, whether it's what resources make the cut and why, was it fairly collegiate? Was it fairly collaborative? How was that process for you all?
It was a spidery mass of chaos. I'm not going to deny it. But the subgroups in each areas were given a lot of autonomy. So we asked the network members to express the areas that they were interested in working on based on either their own experience or an area that they wanted to develop into. So we made sure that the people that had a passion could be working in that area. So we channeled the knowledge and experience that already existed or the enthusiasm that was within the network. And really, myself and Jeanette Castle, who's now the chair of the network, but was vice chair at that point in time, we really just trusted that the people in the subgroups knew what they were doing. And as the information got pulled together, we then took the draft sections to network meetings and we reviewed them in the network meetings. But it was very collaborative, but very independent both at the same time.
Amazing. I like that. Bringing an inclusive approach to inclusive work. It's so meta, very much here for it. Thank you, Sally. Does anybody have any last minute questions? What we can do, because I know that this work, it can be in equal parts inspiring and overwhelming, and it can intersect with personal areas as well. So we will be pausing the recording, and I think Sally and myself were very happy to stay on for a few minutes more if anybody wants to ask a question or share any thoughts off record. But yeah, if anybody does want to raise their hand, pop something in the chat, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, we'll start drawing to a gentle close. You might be able to see that we have been joined by one of our pets of CILIPS, Shep. I'm not sure how visible he is. I think that's the cue that lunchtime is approaching.
There's just the top of some fluff showing.
Oh, Sheppy, say hello. Sheppy, his sister Winnie is far more camera shy, but yeah, you're all, to Shep, a stranger is a friend he hasn't met yet, so you're all Sheppy's friends now, and he's very passionate about inclusion, aren't you, Shep? I don't see any final questions. So yeah, I think we'll draw to a gentle close. As I say, we will be here for a few minutes more if anyone wants to ask any questions off the recording. But can you all just firstly join me in thanking Sally so much for that incredible overview? I think we know where we're all going to be clicking into the toolkit and delving into some fantastic lunchtime reading for everybody. It's so inspiring as a piece of work and something that you've shared with the whole professional community as well. Yeah, it's just, I think, at the heart of why we do what we do and the unique role that libraries have to play in all of this. So, oh, sorry, Shep, I think that's a question. I think that's Sheppy just agreeing with me. He's off to shout at his sister. So yeah, thank you. We really, really appreciate today. I'm just going to quickly grab our little evaluation link. I'll pop this in the chat, very short and sweet. If you could share your thoughts on the session, what you'd like, what other themes, especially EDI related, that you would love to see as part of the CILIPS online learning session. Hint, hint, the more you share with us, the more we get to do all this again. But yeah, virtual real applause for Sally. That was such a fantastic overview, fantastic afternoon, fantastic hour. I will pause the recording now. And yeah, if everybody heading off, enjoy the rest of your Fridays. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for listening to me ramble at you for the best part of an hour. It's very appreciated.
Thank you,
and Shep
Sally.
appreciates it too, Sally. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Sally.
Bye.
See you.